You may have recognized the words of that song taken from Psalm 121. Just a great, great psalm of comfort and encouragement, and appropriate, because we're talking about the problem of evil. And just in case you're somebody who has problems with connecting things in your mind, that has no connection to Eric, okay? Just thought I'd tell you that. But as David mentioned earlier, you can't watch TV, read a newspaper, listen to the radio, any of that kind of stuff without being overwhelmed with disaster and turmoil and problems and all kinds of selfishness and greeds. And it's just there. It's everywhere. And as Solomon is writing for us in Ecclesiastes, a journal of his search for the meaning of life, what is the good and purpose of all this? He's going to take us through that idea of evil. And it's probably going to, if you just look at it from afar, you might think, boy, that's a strange approach to what he's writing, because he's going to talk about citizenship quite a bit here in chapter 8. And you could say, well, where does that match up with any of this? Hopefully it'll make some sense to you as we get into it. Just that whole problem of evil, and it's everywhere in the kingdom. It's everywhere. It's just sin and stress and turmoil does exist. There's a couple tough questions that people ask when we think about the bad stuff that's going on in our world. Some might ask, does God know about it and doesn't care? Is it like all these bad things are going on and God sees it, but he just really doesn't care? He's just off in his journey, and it doesn't matter to him that this stuff is going on. It's like, it's your battle, you fight it out. Maybe. Or another question that people might ask is, does he know? And I wonder, I don't know which of these two questions are worse, but does he know and care, but lacks the power and the ability to do anything about it? I mean, is God out there and he's looking down and saying, oh man, look at what I created, look what I started. Man, are they in trouble? I wish I could do something about it. I don't know which of those two are worse. Somebody said that when people ask you about where is God when all these bad things happen, you might want to ask them, well, where does all the good stuff come from? If you're going to blame God for all the bad, are you blaming God for the good as well? Maybe crediting God for it. During World War II, there was a meeting, and someone, I think it was like a church type meeting, and someone asked the question, why doesn't God stop this war? Good question. The leader gave the answer that said, because he didn't start it. And man, and not God, is the one who's probably responsible for most of the misery on this earth. And we try to do things contrary to how God would have us do it. We all have our own ideas and our own directions and our set plans, and we try to do it our way instead of listening to God, instead of following his precepts. We want to do things our way, and we mess things up. It's hard to blame God for that, I think. So in chapter 8, we're going to see a lot of different things that he says about that whole scheme of evil. Where's it coming from? What's your role as a citizen, especially today as Christians, because we are under attack more than we've ever been. That's amazing. Christianity is the foundation of our country, the foundation of our culture. And now we're the ones who are on the outside and are the ones under attack. And every day you hear things in the news that are against the principles that you and I would adhere to. So he's going to start asking questions. In verse 1, it just seems maybe like, not connected. But he says, who is like the wise man? Who knows the explanation of things? Wisdom brightens a man's face and changes his hard appearance. There's a couple things that we want to bring out of this. Who's wise or who's like him? Just a couple observations. This person who's wise has special knowledge. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, there's a great string of discussion there that Paul writes that talks about the spiritual man versus the natural or the non-spiritual man. And the spiritual person seems to be empowered or enabled in a special way by the Spirit of God so that he can have certain insights and certain discernments and be able to know what is right and wrong. It's a unique person. He brightens his face, it tells us there. It brightens the man's face. It's talking, first of all, about a stable person. He's stable because of his experiences, his understanding of what life is, but it's also going to show, when it's brightened his face, is a visible joy. Ray Stedman was a great pastor up in the northern part of the United States, and when he was writing on this verse, he says, grace, not grease, makes the face shine. Think about that, those of you with makeup on. Grace, not grease, makes the face shine. Thank you, Ray Stedman. Joy, visibly expressed, seen in their hearts and their lives and on their disposition. And it does change the inner disposition. It says it changes its hard appearance. It softens and mellows and helps us grow. And that's just a great work of the Holy Spirit of God. Joy is God's purpose for us. It comes to wise men in spite of their circumstances. So Solomon's going to explore the problem of evil, and he's going to do that by looking at probably at least 3 key areas of life. And the first one is found in verses 2 through 9. It's that area of obeying authorities. I'm going to read those verses to you. It says, obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, what are you doing? Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and a wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a man's misery weighs heavily upon him. Since no man knows the future, who can tell him what is to come? No man has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the day of his death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw, Solomon's saying, all this I saw, I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Despite the injustices in government, there's still a proper power that our governments have that's authorized by God. You can read through Romans 13, first 7 verses there. Walter Kaiser said this, that the purpose of government is the righteous administration of justice. When they do it right, that's what they're doing. The government done right is looking out for the good of all people, making sure that righteousness reigns and that people are being treated justly and fairly. And yet you and I can point out the fact that millions of people around the world are oppressed by the authorities, by their own governments. Now, that's what Solomon's pointing out here. And it's interesting to remember that he was a powerful, probably one of the most powerful monarchs in his area. So he's doing a self-evaluation here and realizing that it's not all that good. In fact, Solomon himself was guilty of harshly treating some of his own people. In 1 Kings chapter 4, then later on in chapter 12, it talks about how he had divided the people up, and each group of people were responsible for a different month of the year and driven hard and harshly toward providing provisions for all the other people in certain circumstances. And it clearly states in there that he was harsh and heavy-handed on those people, every one of them. And then when Rehoboam was going to take over some of those responsibilities, he went to the elders and asked for their advice. How do I handle this? The people are upset. They're all angry at the king. What do I do? The elders said to him, you know, you ought to back off a little. You ought to mellow down a little bit. You ought to soften, build the trust of the people again. Okay, then he went to the younger up-and-coming leaders, and he went to them and said, how do you think I should handle this? And they said, you know what? You should go 10 times stronger on them. Show them who's boss. You're the king next. You let them know what's going on. He elected to go that direction, and it was a disaster for them. So Solomon sees all this kind of stuff, and he knows that he's as much guilty as anybody else in this thing. In their culture, the Eastern rulers had the power of life and death over all the people. They were not elected. Now, unless you start thinking, boy, that would be a great job. You know, I'd be over everybody, and whatever I said goes, and if I want that guy snuffed out, that's fine. I can do that. That's okay. But most of the Eastern rulers in history didn't have long lives. They basically were the next person who wanted to rebel and take their job did it through the death of the leader. So I don't think it was a very attractive place to be. So what do you do if the king commands for you to do something that is evil? Interesting. That's a great question. God sometimes allows us to struggle and evaluate and to think and puzzle with what's going on in our world, because I think that's part of his plan. I think he wants us to experience that so we trust him even more. In verse 2, we saw that Solomon first suggested, obey the king. Keep the commands that are given to you. And he said, be true to his oath. You obey because you're a citizen. Now, some of you here became citizens after coming to this country. You had to go through the process, and you had to swear and become a citizen. You swore your allegiance. So you would definitely fit in here. But for those of you who maybe were born here, you can say, I didn't do that. I didn't swear in. Well, but when you were in kindergarten, maybe before, you raised your little hand and put the other one on your heart and said something like, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the, and you know how it goes. And you gave your allegiance to the government, to our nation, and you pledged your support there. All of those are told that you should stay connected and obedient to the king. We share the blessings of the government. We should also share the responsibilities of the government. Now, a very bright young person, about 100 years ago, his name was Will Rogers. Will Rogers made this astute observation. We ought to be grateful that we don't get as much government as we paid for. That's good news, isn't it? We don't want that much government. We don't want that interference. In verse 4, Solomon said, don't question the authority. It's not safe to question the authority in that country because the state has the ability and the power to compel us to fall in line. And by the way, Romans 13, other passages, government is ordained and set up by God. And that's how that government was set up. Verse 5 tells you to look out for yourself. Avoid that punishment. Obedience is expected of everyone, so the government has the right to increase the punishment until you finally give in and comply. All of that sounds really bad and vicious. And then when you come to verse 8, the reminder is, a day is coming. Even kings will not escape death and judgment. You could lose your life obeying the government. That's possible. Soldiers do. Death is wholly in God's hand. He also says in verse 8 that no one is ever discharged from war. In the early 1940s, there was a gentleman, I don't know his first name, his last name was Slavik, S-L-O-V-I-K, And apparently, he was a really nice guy. It seems like everybody liked this person. And I don't know a lot about his capabilities and stuff, but he was he was a young man. And eventually, he met a young lady that he fell in love with, and everybody was really happy because I think from what I understand, he seemed to be the type of guy that people didn't think was going to end up with someone, and he did. And he ended up with this nice young lady, and they got married, and oh, they were so happy. And then the notice came in the mail. He had been drafted into the military. And so he was taken into the military, and then he went and got his training. And the next thing he knew, he was thrown out on the front in World War II and was in the heat of the battle. And he didn't like it, and he couldn't handle it. And he put his weapons down, and he fled, what they would call AWOL. So Private Slavic ran away from the battle. He was captured by military police or somebody, and they were going to do a trial. And somehow, through this whole process, his commanding officers and some of the other people involved all pled that you would not punish him too harshly. This is a really good guy. Private Slavic is the last person that the United States military has executed for AWOL. Their conclusion was, we know, they all knew he was a good guy. Nobody wanted to do this. But if you do, then others are going to take up that too, and they're going to run away. And so they executed him. That theory must be right because they haven't done anybody since then. And that's been about 70 years ago. There are possibilities that can come from this. What do you do when you disagree with what the government or the authorities are doing? One of the possibilities is disobedience. You can just ignore it. If they passed a rule, they put a stop sign up at that corner, there shouldn't be a stop sign at that corner. And if they put it there, just ignore it. Just run through it. It's okay. Or you can desert, like Private Slavic did. You can run, leave the country or leave the area or whatever you're going to do. Or defiance. Not only disobey it, but then protest it and, paint something else on the stop sign and sit underneath it with a picket sign or whatever you want to do. You can do those kinds of acts of defiance. Is there ever a place for civil disobedience? I don't know. Here's what Thomas Jefferson said. Resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. Remember his context, he was talking about Mother England. And he said, if you want to do God's will, then you're going to take a stand and draw that line in the sand, and we're not letting England push us around anymore. And that paid off well for us in our culture and went pretty good. Not a politician, but Peter said we ought to obey God rather than man. And he said that on a couple different occasions. And in that particular setting, he was told, taken to prison, thrown in there, told you, and when they were releasing him, you will never speak about this Jesus again. No more of these public sermons. We don't want that. Stay off your soapbox. And he just said to them, what am I supposed to do? It's more important that I obey God than I listen to you. Dangerous approach, but it's what he took. How we express our disagreement with governments and other authorities really requires a lot of wisdom and grace. In verses 5 and 6, he was encouraging us to use discernment in how we approach that. So then we come to verses 10 through 14, and it speaks about the injustices of this world. There's so much injustice, more than we even know about, more than we want to admit. It's hard to even deal with sometimes. A gentleman named John Kenneth Galbraith made this statement, observation. Under capitalism, man exploits man. But under communism, it's exactly the reverse. Man exploits man. Do you get that? Okay, that's a cute little, okay, hang in there. There's evil in government, but it's because there's evil in the fallen man. No one's exempt from that. No government, no individual can ever say that, well, I have no evil within me. We all do. So he makes some observations, and we come to verse 10, and he says this. Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise. In the city where they did this too is meaningless of life. So he attended a funeral, and it was somebody who was well known apparently and was a bigwig, and he went to this funeral, and it turns out that everybody knew that this was a bad guy. But he always went to church, to the temple. He was out front. He was a big show kind of person. And when it came to his funeral, everybody talked about what a wonderful guy he was, and nobody talked about the reality of how evil he was. And just the same, when the funeral was over, there was a huge procession, and they all went from the city where he was at all the way out to the cemetery. Lots and lots of people followed him. And Solomon's observation is not that, see, it paid off because he did bad stuff and people still spoke nice of him. His observation is they still buried him. He still died. And there was nothing he could do to stop that. And although that show and that procession was all false, people probably knew that. They knew that there was nothing great about this person. None of his evil ways were mentioned. And in a sense, he could have thought that he got away with it, and maybe the people thought they got away with it. But in the end, he's going to stand before a righteous judge and not get away with it. Verse 11 says, when the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, the hearts of people are filled with schemes to do wrong. In a sense, he's thinking the funeral, this guy didn't pay for it. And when people do stuff and there's a delay in justice, it often brings an increase in crime. It encourages the criminals. It frustrates others, the righteous people, the good people, because no justice means people feel helpless and hopeless. No one cares. Some of them then resort to saying, well, then who does care? Let's just do what's wrong. If you don't think that happens, go visit any big city, any major city. Things that you and I would get upset about if it happened on our property or at our house. Go in a city and you call the police department, they're like, what? You're worried about that? We don't have time to deal with that. We got big issues here. People just get worse and worse and worse if there's not justice being given. Now, God is long-suffering, and that's part of the complaint, because it looks like those bad people are getting away with things, and God is long-suffering. He doesn't always judge immediately. However, his mercy should not be confused or used even as an excuse for wicked and cruel behavior. Just because you're not going to get zapped on the spot doesn't mean that, God doesn't execute. The wicked are going to eventually be judged, and the righteous are eventually going to be rewarded. Verses 12 and 13. Although a wicked man commits 100 crimes and still lives a long time, I know it will go better with God-fearing men who are reverent before God. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. They're going to be judged. And until Jesus comes again, there's always going to be injustices. I think there's two encouragements that we want to draw for ourselves here. One is that God will preserve his own. Despite of what happens to them physically or spiritually or any other way, God's going to preserve those that are his own people. And God will judge. Boy, did I lose everything there. God will judge the wrong in his own time. God will bring that judgment on them. Verses 15 through 17 gives us the conclusion to this whole mystery kind of thing, and it's very similar to what he has said before. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because nothing's better for a man under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany him in his work all the days of the life God has given him under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe man's labor on earth, his eyes not seeing sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all his efforts to search it out, man cannot discover its meaning. Even if a wise man claims he knows, he cannot really comprehend. So Solomon researched, and he searched everywhere, and he looked at everything and experienced it all, and he came to the conclusion that no one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. No one gets the whole picture. No one can explain God. No one can explain all of his doings. Now, I understand in Deuteronomy 29:29, God did tell Israel that there were things about God and about his ways that they needed to understand and search out and to know. And that's true. There are things that we need to know. God tells us to look into that. But God does not expect us to know the unknowable. He doesn't expect us to understand the things that are above us. But he wants us to obey what he does reveal and what he does teach us. And the more that we obey him, the more that he teaches us. So here, for the fourth time in these first 8 chapters, Solomon's telling us to enjoy life and delight in the fruit of our labors. This is not eat, drink, and be merry, like the hedonist viewpoint. That's all based on pleasure. It's based on a lie. It gives no regard to God. But what he's saying here, as far as the eat, drink, and be merry, with a faith outlook, accept life as God's gift and enjoy it. Know that he cares and that he provides for you all of your needs, everything he's providing. Instead of worrying about what you don't have, give thanks for what you do have. Which is a better way to go? The mad search of empty plastic people, or contentment and enjoyment with the gifts that God, who loves us and who knows us, wants to provide for us? Enjoyment's a gift from God. Enjoying life, understanding that he's in control and that he has a plan. It can come no matter what you do or what you're going through. And the wise person of verse 1 gets the most out of life that he can put into it as well. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much for the gifts that you give to us in this life. We think in terms of people that you give to us to enjoy, to love, and to fellowship with. They're such a strength, and they're such a blessing and a gift from you. We also think of things like your word that is so powerful and so guiding to us. We need it desperately. And it reveals your heart, some of your mind to us. And as much as we're able to, we try to grasp that. Thank you for that. Lord, thank you for the opportunities you give to us in this world, in this life, to serve and honor you. Even in all the confusion of life, even in all the difficulties of the authorities that are above us and so many going the wrong direction, you still speak to us and give us opportunities to stand for you and to make a difference. Thank you for those opportunities. God, we pray that you would use us to touch a world that so desperately needs the light of salvation, and that you would use us to encourage and build one another up. Thank you again for those chances you give to us. And may Jesus Christ be praised. In his name we ask. Amen.